everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Performance Cafe. It's lovely to have you around here, and I think we've been talking quite a lot about goal setting in the past couple of weeks, just coming out of January, New Year's resolutions, all that kind of stuff. And one of the biggest goals I think that people give up on is the concept of personal development. Firstly, I think that very often when we develop people, it's paid for by companies. And if companies don't appreciate the need for personal development of employees, then, we're already losing a certain amount of interest in the subject. And I wanted to today, in fact, for a couple of these episodes, I actually want to dig into personal development a bit because I think there's a lot of confusion as to what is it and what does it mean. So firstly, personal development is about developing the individual person. The reason I state that is because very often we think of personal development as I'm going to add skills to that person. I'm going to add competencies to that person. So I'm going to pack them off and I'm going to let them do an MBA. It's not that there's no personal development in that. But very often, the training we send employees on or the training that we go on as employees is more around skills about how well I do something in a sort of like a technical frame. This has kind of been a bit of a bugbear of mine, especially around some of the institutes for higher learning, is that they're very good at making sure that we know how to do the work, but we don't actually develop the person as a great leader, as a great team member, whatever the case may be. So when we take a look at a sort of fairly traditional definition of personal development, we see that personal development encompasses the intentional efforts to enhance various aspects of a person's life. Now, this includes self-awareness, skills acquisition, and mindset cultivation. Notice that out of the three, only one of them speaks about skills. The other two are about intrapersonal development. It's also considered a lifelong journey aimed at realizing one's full potential and achieving personal goals. So what we're saying here is that this is not I'm quickly going to go and personal develop for 3 months and get it over and done with. It's actually at each life stage, at each event in our lives, we stop, we pause, we reflect, we move forward. Now, sometimes we don't stop, pause, and reflect. We just move forward because the business is busy and I'm busy and there's too much to do and I've got a team that depends on me and all this kind of stuff. And that's typical of why I want to speak about personal development, is because we tend to put ourselves on hold because everything around us is just so darn busy. However, personal growth is incredibly important. And today I want to explain to you the different facets of where it contributes to a person's life. But if you think about it, the world is dynamic. And if we can't move along with the world, then we cannot be successful. And we see this in someone. I had the most interesting experience the other day. A company that I'm working with was wanting to hire someone, and they absolutely loved this person. But this person spent 15 years doing the same job day in, day out. So this person was wash, rinse, repeating 1 year over and over again. And they said, we cannot hire this person because they might not be successful because they've been doing the same thing over and over for 15 years. They might not have the necessary resilience, adaptability. They might not be able to navigate change and anomalies. And so that is why personal development as continuous growth is so incredibly important. And to explain this to you, I'd like to give you the analogy of a stagnant pond. Now, I want you to imagine you're walking through a forest. It's a dense, dense forest. It's just green around you, right? You can't even see the sky. Then in this little forest, you come across a pond. And the pond doesn't have a stream that goes in or a stream that goes out. It's just sitting there. And that little pond is dead quiet. right? There's no ripples. It's just this little isolated island in the middle of everything. Now, very often, for people who do not develop themselves and for companies who do not develop their people, we land up with a bunch of stagnant ponds working for us. And some of the effects are the following. Firstly, stagnation. Nothing's going to come in, nothing's going to go out. What happens? Well, when things stagnate, they just stand there and accumulate debris and algae and stuff like it just stays there. There's no movement, there's no flow. And so what happens is because there's no movement, nothing changes. And all that the pond has to work with is the ecosystem that's already there. So this is very similar for a person who avoids personal development because they may find themselves stuck in a status quo. And the problem is that people think that when you're stuck, that, you just sort of become numb and you stay there. Well, that's actually the upside. The downside is that you're accumulating mental and emotional clutter by not working through it. And so from that perspective, there's hollowness, there's nothing. And if you find that yourself or someone that you know is stagnant, has stagnated, you can ask yourself, what are you allowing to grow there? Because besides the fact that you actually have this void, it's the negative stuff that grows. And we all have this, right? It's so interesting. Something goes wrong, and what do? We have our negative talk to ourselves. And if you're that stagnant pond, then all that you do is you're breathing that negative talk. Some of you will know, I call mine Tony. Tony's having a field day, right? He's got a whole pond that just listens to him. And the problem is that because we're not actually challenging the status quo, we're not challenging our mental and emotional clutter, that is where we get to stay. And we then actually just reinforce our own beliefs. And often our beliefs are that we can't grow, we can't change, we can't develop. Okay. So that's the first reason for making sure that you participate in personal development. The next thing is with this little pond being an isle or owned a little entity all to itself, it doesn't ever need to adapt. So external changes may occur. It can't adapt to those. And what happens is that might start off as resilience, but ends then as the defeat of this little stagnant pond. Because if it cannot adapt to shifts in weather, in shifts in the elements, it's not going to survive. And so similarly with our personal development, individuals may find it challenging to adapt to life changes. And they might not be able to navigate challenges and maybe even seize opportunities. And so from that perspective, the question would be is, if you're not practicing personal development, what is it that you're allowing to pass you by? What is going past you that you cannot adapt to or make use of as an opportunity? Next up, there's also limited growth. And what's growing is not great, right? So because there's nothing fresh coming in and nothing fresh going out, it's a confined environment. So you don't have to invest in personal development in this pond. Okay, it's going to lead to limited personal and professional growth. It's also going to mean that whatever the boundaries are of your current capabilities, of your current thinking, of your current being, that's going to stay there. The important part of this is I want to ask you, if you're not growing, what aspirations or dreams are you giving up on? I always when I speak to my coaching clients, I ask them, what did you want to be when you were 7 or 8? And the reason I ask that particular time frame is because they're interested enough to interact and understand the world around them, but they're too young to get too practical. And very often when we start speaking about those dreams and those aspirations, people go, actually, I'd still like to do that, or I'd still like to be part of that somehow. And so just imagine if there's an aspiration or a dream that you just cannot grow into because there's been no personal development. Next, of course, unseen potential. So beneath the surface of the stagnant pond, there could be the potential for vibrant life. There might be seeds and eggs and whatever else in there, but it's going to remain untapped if there's nothing feeding it fresh water, if it's not getting light, if it's not getting different kinds of organisms and food in it to support the life within. And so similarly, neglect of personal development may lead to people failing to uncover hidden talents and skills and unrealized potential. So you might say, well, innocent, here I am, and I think this is the potential I have, and this is the skills and talents I've always had. What about something new? At the rate that our world and technology evolves, there's always place to do something new. And so what if something that you believe is out of reach isn't, but you just don't realize it because you never really tried? That is time to get fresh water into that pond. Next, lack of clarity. So in my mind, the pond is murky, right? There's stuff that's dying in there already, and so it's all icky and sludgy, and there's no clarity. You can't see what's what. And I think similarly, when we talk about personal development, there's this inability to gain clarity about what are my values, what are my goals, and what's my purpose. And I'll tell you why that particularly is sad to me. When I'm coaching people, so often what we come to realize is that people live the life that was given to them by others. So typically we would hear, well, my parents were of this religion, or they were of this culture, or I was at this school and that was what the alumni did. And so we find that very often, even at the age of 40 or 50, people are still living within the confines of what their life was defined as when they were teenagers and young adults. And so if we're that stagnant pond, we don't even realize we're not living the life we want to live. So I want to ask you, if you think you're that stagnant pond, do you know who you really are? Who put the plants in your pond? And are you living your life, or was your life designed by whoever built this pond that you've just let go idle? And what could happen if you got that clarity? And last, and certainly not least, you can imagine that stagnant water can definitely resist attempts to disturb its tranquility. And so similarly, individuals avoiding personal development, they're going to resist that change, right? Even when that change, even if it's sore and uncomfortable, is necessary for their growth and their well-being. And it's so interesting that we most of us understand this, even just at a very fundamental level, that we do not grow inside our comfort zone. We have to be stretched outside. And so the question is, what are you resisting just so that you don't have to grow? And how are you sacrificing your well-being because you are not growing? In contrast, we can practice personal development, and we can introduce a fresh flowing stream into the pond. It will bring in movement and clarity and the potential for a renewed life. And it's about embracing change and that continuous learning and evolving to the best version of yourself. As many of you will know, I'm a really big proponent of the growth mindset. And whenever we talk about growth mindset, I always say the word yet is the biggest player there. I don't know how to do it yet. I haven't achieved my goal yet. Doesn't mean I'm not going to. It means I'm en route. And so I hope that you can take this video and listen to it and maybe stop and pause and go backwards and forwards through it a little bit. And think honestly, what is it in your life that has become the stagnant pond that you need to breathe new life into and get a new stream into, so that you can actually develop to the best version of yourself? Because also once we become the best version of ourselves at any one point in time, we are better mentors and teachers and coaches and bosses and leaders and employees, because we're contributing in the best way that we can. So I hope this leads you to yet more reflection. I seem to be doing a lot of that with you lately, and that you will be excited and come back next week, Wednesday, because I think I'm then going to tell you how to find out where to start with your personal development, give you a couple of pointers on how we do that. So thank you for listening to this episode. As always, I hope you've enjoyed it. And then if you want to see more of these, we are available on all the major social media channels. And these are also transcribed and put as blogs into Perform Forward's website, and that is performforward.com. If you want to hear more of us and have questions or topics you'd like us to cover, then please will you leave me a comment on your social media platform of choice, and we will get back to you there. And then until I see you next week, I hope that you have a fabulous one, and I hope that, yes, your pond is stirring and that there's fresh flowing water coming in. And then I'll see you next time on the Performance Cafe.